Cut it.
Okay.
Ready.
So good morning and welcome to our first Connecting with Nature live from the Malahat Skywalk. My name is James. I'm an outdoor host and enthusiast. I want to take a moment though to say that we gratefully acknowledge that we are here on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Malahat Nation, part of the Coast Salish peoples. We're here actually right at the start of our 600-meter elevated walkway that leads us out to our tower, our spiral tower that rises up an additional 10 stories above the beautiful fjords, mountains, and looking out over the coastal Douglas fir forest. One of the reasons we're here today is that sometimes we can just get overwhelmed by the amazing enormity of the trees and the mountains and the ocean views, and we forget that there are a lot of other organisms that are equally vital to making this a very healthy ecosystem. And that's what we're going to do a bit today. We're going to focus in on some of the smaller organisms that we have here. First of all, many of you are joining us for the first time. Actually, all of you are joining us on this particular Connecting to Nature live for the first time, but some of you have been here before. Many of you have been out in nature and you've seen moss before, so that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. Many of you can actually see moss off in the distance, or I can even have a little piece here. Okay. So moss is actually a plant, but it's not the traditional type of plant that we see. It's actually referred to as a non-vascular plant, and all that means is it doesn't have the roots and stems and structure that we typically associate with a plant. As you can see, it does have some of the plant-like structure above, but it actually is not bringing water up through roots because it doesn't have roots. It's actually getting the moisture through the air, and that's one of the reasons that it does so well in moist areas, often with lots of rain or fog. It's actually providing us with large amounts of oxygen because it's taking carbon dioxide in out of the atmosphere. It's using the sunshine to help to photosynthesize that, break it down, release the oxygen, and it uses the carbon to actually make food for itself. Okay, so it's actually a great carbon sink. Another great feature of moss is it actually can act like a blanket. So in the winter time, it's actually helping to keep the organisms and bacteria in the soil and any small plants warmer so that they don't die off if it gets extremely cold. Obviously, it's providing moisture at all times, and that's particularly important during our hot summers here because we often have 7 to 10 weeks of almost no rain during the summer here. It also, because it has that moisture in it and that blanket effect, it actually provides a bit of shade and cooling for the soil so those organisms that are underneath don't get killed. So it's very important for a very healthy ecosystem for us. All right. So when you look out, you can actually see some other things that in our common names we often refer to as moss, and I only recently found out they actually aren't moss at all. They're actually something called lichen. So we're going to talk a little bit about lichen today. There are actually 3 separate categories of lichen that we'll go into in a second. But first I should explain that lichen, although it looks like a plant, it actually isn't a plant. It's actually a combination of fungi and algae, and they get together, and sometimes using cyanobacteria, they create a new organism, shared symbiotic relationship, that this new organism actually does a lot of the things that plants do, but it actually can withstand even harsher weather and temperature than moss can. In fact, recently they've actually sent some species of lichen up into space, and they've actually survived being in outer space, which is pretty remarkable when you think that next times that we do travel to planets, that's one of the things that scientists will be looking for, is things that might look a little bit like lichen. Okay, so we're going to get into the 3 different categories of lichen. One of the reasons I break it down into those 3 simple categories is there are actually said to be over 14,000 different species of lichen around the world. 3,700 of those are in North America, and many of them look a little bit alike. So the general categories This one is actually known as fruticose lichen. Fruticose lichen gets its name from a Latin word that means shrub. Typically they're dangling down, hanging down, often from tree branches. You can see them off in the distance here. Or sometimes they're actually propped up against each other, looking very much like a shrub. All right. We also have foliose lichen. Foliose lichen, as you might imagine, can look a little bit like a leaf. All that it means, foliose, means that it has two distinct sides to it. So you'll see many different types like this. So both of these come in many different forms. They come in many different names. So one of the questions I have for you is, how many different names can you come up that you've heard about for this hair-like? Often it's referred to, you'll hear the word hair or fur in there. So I'd love to have you join us online with the chat, and if you can submit some of the names that you've heard, that would be helpful for all of us, and actually quite exciting to find out new ones that I haven't heard about. Similarly, with some of the foliose lichen, it can look very paper-like, but there are some other descriptions to it as well. Both of these lichens also help to support some of the wildlife. They are both grabbed by birds and they use it to help build their nests. And also some of the larger animals like deer and elk could actually use them to eat during the winter months. As remember, I did say they will survive during the winter when other plants are dying. So here's a great source of food for them when there isn't much else available to them. And finally, the third category of lichen looks a little bit like chalk or makeup. It actually is called crustose, which is very descriptive of it. It actually attaches itself to a tree or a rock. All three of these lichen are really important to us because they are what we call pioneer species. And what does a pioneer species mean? It means that it's actually one of the first things that shows up after a large major event like a volcano, or if a glacier comes through and strips off all the soil and all the plant life, leaving bare rock. Lichen can actually be one of the first species to arise out of what seems to be nothing. And that goes a lot of credit to the fungi and the algae that are in there and the bacteria working together. When they are on that bare rock over decades or even centuries, they can actually break that rock down and help create soil. And even after the soil is created, they can actually add to that soil and actually essentially fertilize it. One of the ways they do that is they actually, through their outside cells, they absorb nitrogen from the air, and they are able to convert that nitrogen into a usable form for plants. And so essentially they're creating a natural fertilizer for other plants, such as these beautiful trees, to be able to grow.
James, we have a question from Nancy.
Yes.
She's wondering, do we know how many kinds of mosses we have here at the Skywalk?
No, that's actually something that would be really interesting. There's a citizen scientist app called iNaturalist, and it's something that's being used to try and encourage people to come out and take pictures of different types of plants and moss and lichen, and it can actually help us and you identify. If you take a picture and upload it onto that app, it will actually tell you what that type of moss is. So that's a really good question. We can start building a library and catalog of all the different creatures. Is something that you can get involved in. We'd love to have you out here. So thank you for that. One of the things you were talking about lichens. Different types of lichen do extremely well in different conditions, and some do not so well when there's certain pollutants or contaminants in the area. So scientists are actually using lichen as an indicator, almost like a litmus test, for us to know how healthy a particular area is and to know what contaminant might be in that particular area. You can see here we actually have many different types of lichen. It's a good indicator of the health of our environment here. So if you go into your local neighborhood forest and see not as many lichens, something that you might want to look into and find out what might be affecting them. So I want to thank you so much for the questions and for engaging with us. We will welcome some of those questions, and if we can use those in future Connecting to Nature Live, that would be helpful for us. And we welcome you to come out and ask us questions while you're here. So thanks again, and I really appreciate you joining us.